Hawthorne and Sycamore, it's so lovely to see you all again. It's time for our class reader. So far we've met the protagonist character, which means the main character, which is Clara, who lives with her brother Peter and her miserable father. We've also met Rupert, who is their cousin, and Peter and Rupert have gone to boarding school together, where Peter has made friends with someone called Simon Bonington, which is also known as the Bony One. And they've met Vanessa, Peter's sister. Then there's Miss Vane, who lives opposite the road, who's a nosy neighbour. And you've got Mrs. Morgan, who helps in the house, and her husband, Mr. Morgan. And I suppose you've also got the grandparents. So, chapter 10. Girls Can Do Anything. Rupert had gone. Christmas was suddenly over. All the brightness was being washed away by torrents of grey rain. Peter was exiled in his room with a sudden and ferocious cold. A new term with the Miss Pinkseys was about to begin. Clara brushed her hair very carefully, put on a most tidy dress, sewed up a hole in the knee of her stockings, and went down to tackle her father. "Oh really, what now?" he demanded as soon as she pushed open the door and stopped hopping from one leg to the other. "I'm a busy man, you know, Clara." "I know," agreed Clara, "but I need to ask you something very important about schools." "Has Peter put you up to this?" demanding her father explosively. "In any case, the answer is no. The subject is not up for discussion. Peter is staying where he is." "No, no, no," said Clara, laying a hand on his arm. "Not Peter's school, mine." "Yours?" he repeated, sounding completely surprised. "Yes," said Clara, and then, at the best as she could, she explained about the handkerchief cases and the ancient maps, the headachy oil stoves and the palms, and Vanessa's school across the other side of town, where there were science labs and open windows and... "I didn't particularly care for that girl, Vanessa," interrupted Clara's father. "And why on earth would you want that sort of education anyway?" "To learn things," explained Clara. "But what would be the point?" asked her truly baffled father. "You don't mind Peter learning things?" "Peter is a boy. Girls can learn things too," cried Clara. "I used to learn a lot when Peter let me help him with his homework in Cornwall. I learned to swim. Why is it different for Peter?" "Peter," said her father, "will one day have to earn his own living." "Well, so will I." "Clara, that's enough," said her father, getting up from his chair and beginning to fold his newspaper very carefully. "This conversation is quite unnecessary. If you do not marry, there will never be a need for you to live independently." Clara opened her mouth to protest, but her father was faster. "I'm sure there'll always be a home for you within the family. If not here, perhaps with your grandparents, or even with Peter. Some way or another you'll be provided for. Now, off you go." He rolled his newspaper, patted on the head with it in dismissal twice, bump, bump, and was gone from the room before she could say another word. Until then, Clara had not thought much about the future. Year after year she had lived in the storybook world of childhood, the glowing adventures of summer in Cornwall, the long, dull chapters of life in between, bookmarked in the middle by Christmas. The illustrations for the story had changed. It was true. Rupert grew taller. Sometimes he even stepped out of the book completely. Peter went off to boarding school, and when he came back he glanced around the old familiar pages of home as if they held new words. But all through the book, Clara hardly changed at all, and it never occurred to her to wonder, what will happen in the end? Until her father's, "Clara, that's enough." And there she was, pages of stories turned over in wadges, whole chapters skipped, grown up, and nothing before her but other people. Clara did not spend much time staring at this bleak last page. She rushed up to the 2 flights of stairs to Peter's room and clattered in without knocking. "God," said Peter unwelcomely, rolling away in bed. "How can I get away from Miss Pinkseys if father won't help me?" demanded Clara, shaking his back. Peter groaned and hunched over under the covers. "You know what will happen to me if I don't," said Clara. "Nothing." "Yes, nothing. Forever and ever like Miss Vane." Peter shrugged. Clara pulled away his pillow and his eiderdown and heaved at the thin mattress until it slid to the floor with Peter still on it. He seemed to be laughing, or shaking at least. "It's not funny." "There'll be an exam," said Peter. "What?" "For that school Vanessa goes to." "An exam? It's miles away, right across town, near their houses. How would you ever get there?" "Perhaps there are buses," suggested Clara. "Anyway, I could walk. Do you really think there's an exam?" "I'm cold. I feel awful. Help me up." Clara helped him lift his mattress back, shook up his pillows, smoothed his eiderdown, fetched the blankets from her own bed and piled them on top. "Wait," she told him, and went down to the kitchen, boiled a kettle and made tea. She stirred honey into it, wished for a lemon, and found one among the Christmas oranges. Mrs. Morgan was there doing vigorous things with a pile of onions and a very large knife. She asked, "What's to do?" Peter's got an awful cold, all shivery. Hot water bottle, said Mrs. Morgan, groping the dresser's cupboard to find one. He hates them. Doesn't matter. Sweat it out. There you are. That'll warm him. Check the stopper and wrap it up into something soft. Father's gone out? I think he might have. He was a bit cross not long ago. What are you cooking, Mrs. Morgan? Onion broth with barley to soften it. There's a pair of chops for your father after, and you, and His Majesty, who doesn't like hot water bottles, can have eggs whenever. Thank you, said Clara gratefully. Mrs. Morgan's cooking wasn't unspectacular and only fairly reliable, but it had kept them alive for long enough now. Soup will be just right for Peter. I like cooking that chicken at Christmas. I should learn to cook properly. Whatever for? Asked Mrs. Morgan. Then you needn't always do it by yourself, and we can make exciting things like at grandmother's house in Cornwall, saffron buns and apple dumplings and... I often make you a cake, interrupted Mrs. Morgan, ponderously indignant. Rough cake, Mrs. Morgan called it. I'll make you a rough cake, she would say, and later it would appear currants and raisins and a heavy fragrant slab of brown sugar sprinkled on top. Very sustaining. Delicious on hungry days. I love your cake, Mrs. Morgan, said Clary. It's just the sort of thing I wish I could cook. I'll show you one of these days, said Mrs. Morgan. Get off up to your brother now before we have pneumonia on our hands. Clary collected her things and went, though not fast enough for Peter, who complained. You've been forever, as soon as she opened the door. 10 minutes less. I made you tea with lemon and honey, and you're to put this under the blankets. You've got to sweat it out, Mrs. Morgan said. What does she know? Lots of things we don't. Peter, what about Vanessa's school? Do you really think I could go there? You could if I helped you. Will you help me? Yes, leave me alone a bit to think. Clara went back to the kitchen and made a cake with Mrs. Morgan. They mixed it in the enamel basin usually used for washing dishes. Goodness, said Clara, who had not expected that. Well, said Mrs. Morgan, it's only a rough cake. The rough cake was a success and neither smelt nor tasted of washing up. Clary and Mrs. Morgan gazed at it with pride. What else can I learn? Asked Clary. Mrs. Morgan sighed and gave her a look. I dare say Mr. Morgan would show you a bit on his guitar, she said. Oh, said Clara, yes, one day, that would be nice. For you see, went on Mrs. Morgan, if I was to learn like the things you were saying, fancy work, saffron buns and dumplings and the like, then what? What? I'll tell you, my girl, you'd be down here making them. You're too clever in this kitchen and you'd be landed with it. Mrs. Morgan, yes, my dear, it's not just cooking I want to learn. Course it isn't, nor was it with me. What did you want? Blacksmithing. Blacksmithing? Time was, Clary, I could have taught you to shoe a horse. My father had a forge, and there was just me and my brother, and he was much younger, and nothing did he care about it. I started off holding the horses' heads, and then I was on the bellows, and before I finished I could shoe a horse, and what do you think of that? I never knew girls could, said Clary, hugely impressed. Girls can do anything, but they're hardly ever let. Why did you stop shoeing horses? Because you married Mr. Morgan? Because my brother got interested in the forge. Oh. When my father died, it went to him. The forge, the cottage with the garden and the 2 pigs out the back and the old horse and the cart. How unfair. And my brother drank it all away and I went scrubbing and charring. And I've still a store of horseshoes put away for special. Made them all myself. Clary flung herself into Mrs. Morgan's enormous arms and hugged her. Us girls must stick together, said Mrs. Morgan, hugging her back. Peter's cold made his eyes and nose run, his head ache, his chest wheeze, and his temper frightful. Clary dozed him with the lemon and honey. Vanessa sent butterscotch for his sore throat, and the bony one appeared one afternoon and visited the kitchen to boil up a hot black licorice water, and Mrs. Morgan cooked up vats of mutton soup, beef broth, stewed chicken, and gruel. Despite all this, he was still coughing when his new school term began. I'll tell Rupert how you are when you get back, shall I? Asked the bony one, when it became clear that he would have to leave without Peter. Don't bother, he won't care, said Peter, and then, in a moment of humanity, seeing his friend's disappointed face, yes, all right, if you like, and started coughing again. Poor old Peter, said Clary. You should be pleased I can't go back, said Peter. Why? That exam. Clary had asked Vanessa and found out that Peter had guessed right. There was an exam. Vanessa had said, oh, that exam. But you could do it, Clary. History questions, maths, some Shakespeare, 12th night. It's always 12th night, everyone says. Scriptures, I think that was all. And there will be the forms to sign, of course. What sort of forms? Ancient forms from parents. I'll go to the office and get them for you if you like. Vanessa had done this the next day and made the trip across town to deliver them. Now Peter demanded to read them. I was going to show you when we were better, said Clary. I have to go back to school when I'm better. Show me now. Father will have to sign them before I even begin. He will never. Give them to me. Peter signed the forms, P. Penrose, in his usual cramped handwriting. Shouldn't you even try and make it look like Father's? Asked Clary. No, if you get in, there'll be more forms to sign sometime or another. Easier not to start faking things. Come on, what's next? Employment of Father, what we put? Dithers around? No. Insurance and banking, wrote Peter. Mother deceased. They both hated looking at those two words so much they turned to the next problem. Address for correspondence, read Peter. It will have to be here. Date. There. Done it. You can post it. What about the exam? Vanessa's going to help me. She says 12th night is full of jokes and we can read it together, said Clary. I'm learning all the kings and all the dates. That was Rupert's idea. I'll talk to Miss Vane about scriptures without saying why. Simon said it was bound to be St. Paul. He said examiners love St. Paul. I've forgotten who he is, said Peter. Don't try and tell me. I don't believe in any of them. The only thing that really matters is maths. Over the next few days, wrapped up in blankets and reeking of eucalyptus, Peter hurried Clary through a refresher course of long division and multiplication, fractions, percentages, and angles of triangles. Unfortunately, his father noticed how much better he got during this process. He was sent back to school before he had time to instruct Clary on the areas of circles. At the train, he pulled out of the station. He leaned from the window to shout last-minute advice. Find out about pie. Pie? Asked Mrs. Morgan. There's pork and there's apple and there's steak and kidney and now and then there's a rabbit. And when I was a girl, there was rook. Rook pie? Asked Clary aghast. Dark meat, said Mrs. Morgan. But what did it taste like? Cat, said Mrs. Morgan. It was very like cat and I didn't care for it. I found out about pie from Mrs. Morgan, wrote Clary to Peter, and Miss Vane was perfect for scriptures and St. Paul. She said her father traced his journey in a map and marked them all with different coloured inks. She showed the map to me, green and blue and purple, red for Damascus and black for Rome. Miss Vane said her father was a man very like St. Paul. They both wrote letters all the time and were both bald. But Miss Vane liked St. Matthew's best. She says he may have been a tax collector, but he was the only one who took the trouble to write down what he heard at the sermon on the Mount. When Clara eventually sat the exam for the grammar school, the scripture question was the first she read. Described two saints giving a brief summary of their lives and their contributions to Christianity. Clara was so thankful that she smiled. Chapter 11. Grammar School Girl. 2 weeks after Clary sat the school entrance exam, a letter arrived, addressed to her father. It said that his daughter had obtained a place and could begin after Easter. Clary's father was not a shouter or a banger around her. He was a sulker. His silent anger filled the air like a dark and clammy fog. He kept it up until Clara was reduced to a hovering misery about the house, and a whole week had passed. Then one evening, meeting her on the stairs, he looked at her directly for the first time in ages and said, I was not consulted at any stage. Right at the beginning you were, replied Clary bravely. I don't suppose for a moment you considered the extra expense. Vanessa said, I can have her old books and her grown out of uniform, said Clary, and grandmother has sent me £10. Did you ask her for that? No, of course not. Why would she do it then? Rupert told her about me taking the exam. I think she was pleased. She helped me once before when I wanted to learn to swim. So everyone knew except me. Was he sad? He sounded terribly sad to Clary. She could hardly bear it. I truly don't think it will make any difference to your father, she told him earnestly. I'll just have to leave a bit early in the morning and be back a bit later in the afternoon. Everything else will be the same. Her father sighed. And when I grow up, she added anxiously, I'll be able to get a job and earn my own money and you won't have to work so hard. I hope I've never complained about that, Clary. Of course you haven't, she exclaimed. Well, he said and sighed again. Well, I suppose you must do as you please. Thank you, said Clary. Oh, thank you. Would you like to come and see it, Father? See what? The school, so you know where I am. Thank you. I do know the location as a matter of fact. Vanessa says there are concerts and things when parents are invited. We'll see, Clary. I didn't mean to make you angry. I'm not angry. Just disappointed. However, you must tell me if there is anything you need. There were many things Clara needed, but nothing would have made her say that to her father just then. With grandmother's £10 and Vanessa's help, she gathered together the essentials. 3 school blouses, a pleated blue skirt that Vanessa had outgrown, and a mushroom hat with a gold and blue ribbon. She also became the owner of 11 brown paper-covered textbooks, which she carried backwards and forwards each day, sometimes sparing a penny for a bus if the weather was dreadful, usually walking, often reading a book as she trudged. As time went by, it was as if she wore an invisible track across the town. She grew a little taller, the books changed, and new ones were heavier than the old. Said Peter, inspecting them when he came home from his school. A bit different from the rubbish you were doing at those old bats in the attic. Yes, agreed Clary. What did your father say about you being there now? I don't think he really notices. I bet he never really went to see it, did he? Not yet. He never will, said Peter, and Clara could understand why he was bitter. Their father had never visited Peter at his boarding school once, not at the beginning when he had vanished into misery so deep that Clara thought he must have died, nor for the winter concert when, dressed in tissue paper kimonos, he, Rupert and Simon, the bony one, astonished the whole school into wild applause for their performance of the three little maids from school. Not even recently when scarlet fever had raged through the classrooms and corridors and Peter had been one of the victims. I don't mind Father not bothering about my new school, said Clary. I truly don't. It's better in a way. It saves him worrying too much. It saves him moaning too much, you mean, said Peter, grinning. No, I don't. Well, only partly. And it's more private this way. Clara had her private wells before, but they had all been in her head. She had never had a private well with real live people in it. Now she had. At the new school, she was not Peter's nuisance sister, Rupert's little cousin, her grandparent's youngest grandchild, Mrs. Morgan's kitchen helper, Miss Vane's good deed, or her father's personal destruction. At school, she was simply Clary Penrose. People noticed her smile, her too long skirt, her quietness, her chopped off hair, and the speed with which she would climb a rope in the gym. She became a person who walked miles to school, could be asked about maths, honestly loved Latin, would remove unwanted spiders and never had any money. A bit of an oddity, but so many others were. It was a good school and accepted oddities as long as they had brains. It was in every way different from Miss Pinksy's. There was a rose garden in the front, a gravelled drive, long, light corridors, and bare, cold classrooms. There was a library with a polished floor and blue curtain windows that held window seats, a gym with wall bars and ropes, a chemistry lab with Bunsen burners and a whiff of sulphur and explosions, a biology room with a field mouse family in a tank. Every morning began with the assembly, one hymn, one Bible reading, one prayer, and a list of announcements. These covered everything from the correct place to store outdoor shoes to those in our thoughts today. Those in our thoughts today only ever made the list once. The following day they were expected to have got whatever it was that had caused their mention. The school motto was Chiara Verum, which means seek the truth. It should have been do not fuss. Not fussing was the basic expectation of every girl and came in very useful when it was time for the midday meal. This was either mince and 2 boiled potatoes, fish and 2 boiled potatoes, or cold meat and 2 boiled potatoes, and was always followed by half a hard green apple and an optional portion of rice pudding. If you didn't eat your midday meal, no fuss was made. You simply went to a little room by the gym and signed a book to say you were fasting. Fasting people were given a spoonful of cod liver oil and a glass of lukewarm milk, a combination so appalling that people seldom signed the book twice. Clary, ravenous after a hurried bread and butter breakfast, long walk and 5 morning classes, managed her dinner with no problem at all. She became friendly with lots of people very quickly. Friendly, but not friends, except for Vanessa, much older and seldom seen beyond a cheerful wave now and then. Friends her own age at school meant more than Clary could manage. Tea at each other's houses, birthday presents and shared outings at weekends. Even so, there were a lot of people to call "Hello, Clary" in the mornings and "See you tomorrow" at the end of the afternoon. "Yes, tomorrow," Clary would always call back as she turned towards home. Somewhere along the long-hour trek, schoolgirl Clary was left behind. She would enter the door of the tall stone house as quiet as a shadow, scuttle upstairs with her books and her mushroom hat squashed under her coat, and re-emerge in her old blue dress as if the long school day had never happened. She was often hovering on the stairs when her father came home, sometimes with a book, sometimes with the knitting Miss Vane had recently introduced to her Sunday school pupils. "It's a square for the Sunday school blanket," she told her father once. "Miss Vane is collecting them and sewing them together. We have to hand in one a week." "Excellent," her father said. "When she has 160, it will be a whole blanket for a poor family," said Clary, encouraged by his approval. "We each have a colour, but it has to be a dark colour because of not showing the dirt. I'm maroon." "Very nice. Mrs. Morgan made stew this morning. I'm hotting it up for supper, and there's greens and some apple pie from yesterday. Do you think it would be nice to eat it in the kitchen? It's warmer there." "Eat yours in the kitchen by all means," said her father cordially. "A very good idea. I'll have mine in the dining room as usual." "Oh," said Clary. "Oh, would you rather I stayed? Would you like me to keep you company?" "Another day. I'd be very pleased to have you," said her father. "However, just now, You have something to do, finished Clary. And her father nodded and looked pleased, as if relieved that she had understood at last. Clary understood very clearly. I have some thinking to do had been the standard dismissal of her childhood and of Peter's too. When she was small, it had impressed her. She tiptoed past her father's closed door and wondered what important things were whirling on the other side. He might be writing poems or working on inventions, a quiet private detective, she speculated after reading Sherlock Holmes, or a secret hero planning his next good deed. Perhaps he worked out plans for battleships. Perhaps he was a sort of spy. Oh, what? Peter exclaimed, exploding with a scornful laughter when Clary at last got to confining these ideas. Father, a spy, an inventor, a poet? He does accounts all day at work and then he comes home and just sits. He doesn't. Messing about with that pipe. Clary resisted the temptation to point out, Sherlock Holmes had a pipe. She said instead, he writes things in a notebook. That, said Peter contemptuously. I read it not long ago. It says, Mrs. Morgan, proper receipts, vain see appearance, school fees, queries, no poetry at all. Yes, but I've seen it often, said Peter relentlessly. He leaves it behind his tobacco jar. You should go and look yourself. I'm not so sneaky, said Clary angrily, and inexplicably tearful too. And I don't believe you either. But over time, she had come to accept that Peter was right. Her father did just sit. I have some thinking to do meant, take yourself away. He had to put up with her because she couldn't, without ridiculous expense, be disposed of to boarding school, but still could take herself away. Separate meals became their usual pattern, Clara in the kitchen with the books for company, her father in the dining room with his thoughts. However, on Sundays they ate together, discussing with a strange sort of politeness, knitting, the weather, the latest letter from Peter, whether Clara was happy, yes thank you father, whether her father was happy, yes thank you Clary, and whether was Peter happy. It really isn't relevant at this stage of his life. Other more interesting topics introduced by Clary, such as the acquisition of a kitten, I don't think so, or what one would buy first. Should one be left with £1,000 by a stranger? I really haven't got the time for such silliness. Always resulted in Clary's father leaving the table before pudding, saying, "Do carry on without me. I have a great deal to do." It might have been lonely for Clara, but it wasn't because of the vast amount of homework school expected her to accomplish. No one could be lonely with Latin and French to translate, chemistry practicals to write up, literature to analyse, and endless quantities of maths. I'm so glad I moved to my new school, wrote Clara to Peter and Rupert. I knew you would be, replied Peter smugly. About time you started using your brain. Rupert also wrote back to her, congratulations on surviving so much education. The trip to knowing when to stop. My whole aim now is to escape. He was 18 and finishing school just as Clara was beginning. He had endured 12 years of it, but the grandparents had no intention of allowing him to escape. Oxford was their next plan for Rupert. Oxford University, whether he liked it or not, because it was the family tradition. Count me out, wrote Rupert to Clara. Family tradition be blowed. I've done my share. 12 chalk dust years of sit there and learn this. 12 years of clammy morning chapel. 12 years of listening to inky men in flapping black gowns tell me what to do. 12 endless, stultifying years, and they think they'll make me go to university. No, thank you. More and more as she grew older, Clara was the person to whom Rupert wrote with his dreams and schemes and startling ideas. Clara tried hard to understand even when she didn't agree, especially about school and university. After all, it was wholly her fault that Rupert had been sent away to boarding school when he was only 7. I think Oxford would be wonderful, she wrote back, but I do see what you mean, because sometimes I dream I am back at Miss Pinksy's, and in my dream I run away down and down and down the stairs, but I'm always still there. The grandparents are furious with you, though. My father said you are the first in the family for 3 generations not to aim for university. What, girls too, I asked, and he said, obviously not counting the girls. I don't think obviously not counting the girls is fair, I said. Why should the girls never go, even if they would like to? And the boys always go, even if they would rather not. So father went away. Most of the time there was only father and me in the house. Me in my room right at the top of him, in his room at the bottom, and the empty rooms in between. But yesterday was lovely because Vanessa came and stayed the night. She said, give my love to Rupert whenever you write. Mrs. Morgan says to tell you there's loads of nonsense to go to university. Morgan says to tell you it's a load of nonsense to go to university. You'll have to be done learning one day, she says. She thinks you should be on the stage. I've been thinking about the summers in Cornwall, Peter, and the long rail journeys and feeling of getting closer and closer. Then towards evening, the train stopping, and at last at the little station, we'd look out and there you were, waiting and waving. It was the best moment ever. Perhaps you might like to be at the railway porter, Rupert. You're good at meeting trains. I have another plan now, replied Rupert, by way of cheerful crumpled postcards. However, one day I may be a railway porter, but only at one station. I'll only meet one train, which no one will be allowed to travel on except Peter, perhaps, and you. Usually Clara shared her message with Rupert, not this one. The breezy jokes were typical Rupert, but other plans, she wondered, and put it away privately under her pillows, where it gave her uneasy dreams. At the end of Rupert's last term of school, he didn't go back to Cornwall. He had a friend whose family lived in Ireland, a fiery-headed footballer named Michael who had won the Latin prize. Rupert went home with him instead. Is he nice? Chloe asked. I suppose so, admitted Peter grudgingly. Everyone said he was a bit mad, but I think they say that about lots of people. He was very brainy, so brainy that he didn't get expelled when he stole a car. Stole a car? Whose car? The heads, the old Fish's. What did he do with it? Oh, just went off the weekend. He brought it back all right. Well, said Clary, if Rupert has to go to university, at least he'll have someone good fun to go with. Perhaps, said Peter. But to Clary's surprise, he seemed suddenly worried. What's wrong? Oh. Peter shook his head irritably, as if shaking away an annoying thought. That chap's going into the army, like his father. Silly fool. You just said he was very clever. For goodness sake, snapped Peter. His mood was not improved by the arrival of a postcard that same afternoon. Having a lovely time, wish you were here, wrote Rupert. Lots of love and don't worry. Clary and Peter were not having a lovely time. It was summer, as golden green and blue as any summer they had ever known, but this year they were not in Cornwall. The grandparents, exhausted by Rupert and his stubbornness, had decided they'd had enough of their grandchildren and needed some peace. Vanessa had been whisked away by her mother to visit an aunt. Only Simon was about. He trudged across town every few days to ask, in the most roundabout way he could devise, for the latest news of Rupert, always beginning with, Vanessa said to ask, he's having a lovely time, Clary told him the day after the postcard. Yes, I know that, said Simon petulantly. Sailing on the lake and all those dances. What? Well, that's what he said anyway on the card that came from Vanessa. A postcard? Yes, shamrock and a donkey, but it didn't say anything about what was going to do next. That's what Vanessa, we were wondering if you knew. Oh, said Clary, startled to hear about the postcard to Vanessa, that she couldn't think what else to say. No, sorry, Simon, he hasn't told us anything. Do you miss him? Simon stared down from his lonely bony height at Clary and asked, What do you mean? I miss him, said Clary, so I thought you might too. Is Vanessa all right? Yes, staying with Mum at our great aunt's cottage, drawing things, dresses. And she says they speak French to each other all day to practice for when she goes to Paris. I mean, if she goes. Then Peter came down and he and Simon went off together. Peter with his hopping limp and the bony one with his bones, and Clary turned to her books in her high room at the top of the house. She walked in private landscape so vivid that the real world went by almost unnoticed, except now and then, when very startling things happened. Rupert joined the army, said Peter. So is his stupid Irish friend. I knew they would. I guess they would. The fools, the fools, the fools. So, I wonder if you could tell me what the date of the next chapter will be, considering that Rupert has just joined the army. I'm sure you can infer why he's joined. And here's a little tip. The next chapter, chapter 12, is called Rupert in Uniform. And I will read that one for you tomorrow. What do you think is going to happen next? Take care.